Hello and welcome. My name is Melissa Galasso, and I'm excited to be with you today to talk about a very important ASU that was just issued by the FASB. This has been something that has gotten a lot of attention as private companies have started to think about implementing the new leases standard. And as part of their outreach in their post-issuance review for public companies who've already implemented leases, they've had multiple roundtables. And the topic of the discount rate for the lessee side has been a hot topic. There is a requirement that you use the rate implicit in the lease. If that rate is not known, then you're supposed to use your incremental borrowing rate. That is the rate that if you were to go to the bank and borrow money on a collateralized basis, same period of time, same amount of money, what would the interest rate be that they would charge you for the loan? Now, for a lot of entities that especially don't have debt, this is difficult to determine. And depending on the number of leases, can be a very large undertaking. So if you have 100 different leases and each one has a different term and is for a different amount, you can potentially have 100 different incremental borrowing rates. And so ASU 2016-02 introduced a private company alternative and offered the use of the risk-free rate. However, the risk-free rate was required to be used for all leases. And that created a lot of difficulty because even with inflation rising right now, interest rates are still at pretty low rates for history. So as a result, the lower the discount rate, obviously the larger the liability. And so it was almost seen as punitive. And so there was feedback that entities would not be interested in the private company alternative because it was all or nothing. And so FASB went back to the table and looked at some alternatives, and the result is ASU 2021-09. So ASU 2021-09 is the discount rate for lessees that are not public business entities. Again, this is a private company alternative, and it was issued in November of 2021, again, with the kindness towards people having to implement this for next year. A lot of people are trying to get through some of the basic accounting this year so they can be ready for next year. And again, Topic 842 does have a private company alternative, again, but it's an accounting policy that if you use that risk-free rate, it had to be for all leases. So it was an all or nothing alternative. And so all this does is allow the private company lessees to make the risk-free rate election instead of for all leases by class of underlying asset. So you can adopt it for maybe your smaller assets like your cars and not adopt it for things like your building, right, that are going to have a significant size. And so this is again going to offer that at the underlying, by class of underlying asset, rather than at the entity-wide level. Now, obviously, because you are selecting which class of assets you are applying this to, you must disclose which class of assets you have elected to use this private company alternative if you choose to use it. Again, it's a private company alternative. It's not required. It is optional, but if you choose to use it, you would have to disclose it. Now, the other thing that they did here is that when the rate implicit in the lease is readily determinable for any individual lease, it now tells us that the lessee must use that rate regardless of whether it has made the risk-free rate election. So again, when you're using the rate that you know what the rate implicit in the lease is, rather than using either the incremental borrowing rate or the risk-free rate, you have to use it because it's known, right? So if it's readily determinable or if it's a known rate, then you must use that. You cannot use the alternative in that scenario if it is known, because again, we want it to be as accurate as possible. Now, we've mentioned that this standard is about to be effective next year, and so many entities, especially private companies, have not yet adopted, right? They still have time. It's not effective to next year. So for those who have not yet adopted Topic 842, the effective date would be the same as Topic 842, so you would follow the same period. On the other hand, for those who have adopted, and they adopted early, then it would be for fiscal years beginning after December 15, 2021, with early adoption permitted. So again, they're giving us two different dates depending on whether or not you've already adopted. Again, there is no public company effective date because this doesn't apply to public companies. All right, so that's a wrap on ASU 2021-09. Excited to see this issue. I think this will help especially smaller entities who are really struggling with the incremental borrowing rate have an alternative for those smaller leases where it's just not worth the effort to find out what your incremental borrowing rate is. So I want to thank you guys so much for joining me, and I hope to see you on a future Nano Learning. Have a great day, guys. Bye-bye.